I'm not really the group tour type of traveler, but hey, I get the appeal. If you're solo, have limited travel planning experience, or just value convenience, then going on a tour is a great option. Having a knowledgeable local guide and a structured itinerary can provide a sense of security and help you get more out of your trip. Plus, if you're hoping to meet people, joining a small group tour is a great way to make instant travel friends without the awkwardness of seeking out and starting conversations on your own. You should travel the way you want. So for many, the group experience is the way to go. In this video, I'm going to share my experience with G Adventures, taking a 13-day guided trip through Central Asia. Stay tuned to see how the tour worked, the details of our day-to-day, and an honest review of the entire experience. So first, a full disclosure. I did not get paid, get a special discount, or was in any way compensated for doing this review. All opinions are my own, and I was not asked by anyone to provide a review, and neither G Adventures nor my guides knew in advance that I was creating this. So a bit about me. I'm a fiercely independent traveler. I've been to close to 100 nations over the past 40 years, and with very few exceptions, I do it myself. All the arrangements, from booking the flights, trains, and buses, obtaining the visas, oftentimes driving, finding accommodations and food, and every other part of the experience. Now, I can attest that doing it yourself is definitely not as convenient. It adds stress, often takes more time, and doesn't always save money, and since I'm the guide, there's nobody other than me to blame or to fix things when stuff goes sideways. But from driving my own African safaris, traveling solo through the Middle East, taking public buses in East Africa, or riding the rails in India, I actually do enjoy almost every aspect of it. Hassles and all, from the planning to the execution. However, there's some spots in the world where you are simply not allowed to do it yourself. Sorry, you can't hike the Inca Trail to Machu Picchu, visit Bhutan, tour the Moai of Easter Island, or go to most of the Galapagos Islands on your own. You must be with a licensed guide or tour company. Although it's definitely not as hot on the tourist trail as Machu Picchu, the nation of Turkmenistan is also one of those mandatory guided spots. To be issued a visa, you must be booked through a licensed tour company. Now, I wanted to visit Turkmenistan, so a tour it is. I looked at various companies, from larger multinational outfits with worldwide offices to locally based tours offered through sites like Get Your Guide, and I settled on G Adventures. Now, I picked them for a variety of reasons. So their price was competitive and comparable with even budget local guides. They had an itinerary that covered most everything I wanted to see in the region. Their tour group sizes are small, and they use local guides and stay in locally owned accommodations. I didn't want to be on a big tour bus with 50 other tourists and stay in generic Western chain hotels. And lastly, they're a Canadian company, and I live in Canada. So it made the payment and booking super smooth. Plus, I figured that if there were issues, it would be far easier to sort it out with them in Canada than if the company was based in Turkmenistan. So since we also wanted to visit Uzbekistan, and G didn't offer a standalone Turkmenistan tour, we booked the 13-day Best of Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan itinerary. Now, G Adventures classifies all their trips by style, service level, physical rating, trip type, and age range. Now, our trip was a classic travel style, which they call that sweet spot between independent backpacking and organized group tours. So classic is their normal tour type, geared for almost anyone. This means it wasn't specifically tailored or themed for families of young kids, or 20 to 30-year-olds, wellness enthusiasts, or any other specific genre. Our trip was a standard service level. Now, this means it had tourist class accommodations with character and used a mix of both public and private transportation. The hotels we stayed in were all comfortable and well located in easy walking distance to most major sites of the cities. The hotels in Uzbekistan were all small family-run guest houses. In Turkmenistan, there were larger first-class corporate-style hotels, since privately owned accommodations simply don't exist there. The two yurt camps had more basic facilities but included meals as well. And for transport, we took one train, a number of private motor coaches, and 4x4 trucks. The trip's physical rating was 3 out of 5, or average, which meant that there could include light to medium activities like hiking in addition to just walking. There was a few short hikes and some extended city walking tours, but pretty much anyone with good health and mobility would be fine. The temperatures this time of year were pretty hot by midday, like 40 degrees or 106 Fahrenheit, and occasionally members of our group would opt out of some of the activities, take a cab back to the hotel, or hang out in the air-conditioned bus or at a cafe if they felt the conditions were too scorching or strenuous. It was a small group trip type, meaning the group had a maximum of 16 persons. Our group had 15 people. And finally, it had an age requirement of 12 or over. But with all G-Adventures trips, anyone under 18 has to be accompanied by an adult. Now, perhaps not surprisingly, my 14-year-old son was the only person in the group who was under 20. Marifat, our Uzbek guide, said he was the youngest traveler she'd ever had on a G-Adventures tour. Now, I guess Turkmenistan isn't very high on most kids' lists of summer destinations. The price we paid was 3,490 Canadian dollars, which at the time we paid was equal to about 2,300 US dollars per person. Being early summer, this was peak season rate, and rates were a bit less at some other times of the year. But our price included a 10% discount since we booked it during their holiday sale. Now, if you're considering booking a trip with G, get on their email list so you can be informed when they offer discounts on select trips. G Adventures also required all participants on this particular itinerary to have their own travel insurance that included evacuation coverage up to 500,000 US dollars. Now, you can buy insurance through whatever provider you choose. I used World Nomads, and the policy for me and my son was about 120 US dollars per person for the entire 13-day trip. As far as other expenses, most days you'll be responsible for your own lunch and dinner costs. And of course, any personal expenses, souvenirs, and optional activities. But both of these countries were very affordable, and a budget of 20 to 30 US dollars per day would likely be more than enough to cover food for most people. Also remember, your drivers and guides do rely on tips for some of their income. And when you see how long days they put in looking out for you, keeping you safe, and teaching you about their homes, you'll naturally want to look out for them as well. Now, although tips are an optional and personal item, I find a budget of an additional 7 to 10 US dollars per person per day for the CEO/guide, and an additional $3 to $5 per day for a driver is a pretty good rule to follow. The trip we took was listed as 13 days. But do know that for most G-Adventures trips, the first day is just your arrival day and includes nothing but accommodations and a meetup with your group. And the last day is typically just breakfast and then transport to the airport. So our trip was actually 11, not 13 days of activities. The tour included 12 nights of accommodation, 10 of which were in hotels and 2 in yurt camps. The fare included all land transportation between Tashkent, Uzbekistan and Ashgabat, Turkmenistan. We took 1 train in Uzbekistan, and the rest was on private buses and 4x4 trucks. For food, the tour fare included 12 breakfasts at our hotels or yurt camps, 1 lunch, and 2 dinners at yurt camps. And of course, it included a lot of guided tours and admissions to dozens of sites along the way. I'll give a brief overview of them a bit later, but if you want all the details on these destinations, be sure to check out the links in the description for my separate detailed videos on both Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan. So how does G-Adventures structure their tours? Now, of course, every destination is a bit different, but all G-Adventures trips are led by a local guide they call the CEO, or Chief Experience Officer. Most tours have just 1 CEO through the whole trip, but because of the peculiarities and regulations of Turkmenistan, we had 2 CEOs, 1 for Uzbekistan and 1 for Turkmenistan. Our Uzbek CEO was Marifat, a woman who grew up in Khiva, Uzbekistan, and knew the region very well. And our Turkmen CEO was Arslan, a man from Ashgabat, Turkmenistan, who was also a local expert. Now, although both CEOs had quite different styles and personalities, they both were knowledgeable, friendly, patient, accommodating, and really great to be around. I have nothing but good things to say about both Arslan and Marifat. They really made the trip special. Our group of 15 was mostly solo travelers, but we also had 2 couples, some friends, 2 siblings, and of course me and my son. The age range was anywhere from early 20s to mid 70s, and they hailed from Australia, Norway, Germany, Canada, and the United States. And most of the fellow group members were lovely, very social, convivial, and extremely well traveled. My 14-year-old son was understandably a bit reserved at first, but was fully welcomed and embraced by the group, and within a day was an enthusiastic participant. They even got him to dance in restaurants a few times, something I have never been able to accomplish on my own. So most days were typically a mix of a guided tour or drive, as well as free time. Only a few of the days were fully scheduled, and that was because of the long travel distances. Almost every evening of the tour, Marifat or Arslan would organize a dinner reservation at a local restaurant that any of the group were free to join in. Typically about 75% of the group gathered for these dinners, but it varied by the day. Also, the waiters at these restaurants would make individual bills for each diner, so you only paid for what you ordered. So here's how this particular itinerary unfolded. On our first day in Tashkent, we met our CEO, Marifat, in the evening, and she organized a dinner at a nearby restaurant to mingle with our fellow group members. Now, most of the group had been with her the previous 2 weeks, traveling through Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan, and already knew each other well. But 3 of us joined in Tashkent. The next morning, we took a 3.5-hour train ride, the 300 kilometers to Samarkand, and then had a tour of many of the landmarks of this lovely city. After a full day together, evening was on our own. The next morning, we had another short tour. Then the rest of our day was free time on our own. We did a few side excursions, but thankfully the hotel was centrally located and an easy walking distance to major sites. And it was hot, so we took advantage of the refreshing hotel swimming pool. The following day, we traveled by private bus north into the rural parts of Uzbekistan. Stops included the ruins of a fortress from the time of Alexander the Great, a stop to swim at the Aydar Kul Lake, and a visit to a local village to see traditional bread baking before moving on to a nearby yurt camp for the evening. We watched the sunset, had dinner, and were treated to a local musician playing traditional music around the campfire. The following day, our bus drove the 4 hours or so to Bukhara, with a few stops along the way to visit some Silk Road related sites, like the ruins of a caravanserai and an ancient underground cistern. We stayed in a lovely small hotel right in the old city and had the rest of the day free. So my son and I visited a 500-year-old hammam for a sweat, massage, and scrub. Day 2 in Bukhara started with a tour of local sites, followed by an afternoon and evening of free time to explore the beautiful city. The next day, first half was driving the 7 hours to Khiva. We stayed in a guest house in a centuries-old madrasa, then we had the rest of the day to explore the city. The following was our last day in Uzbekistan. We had a 4-hour tour of the lovely maze-like old city of Khiva. Marifat, our guide, had grown up nearby and knew the city well. We stopped into some local shops to view local craft people at work, and then had a free afternoon. That evening, we met up with our new CEO, Arslan, who would guide us during our time in Turkmenistan, then had a farewell dinner to bid goodbye to Marifat and a member of our group who was ending her tour in Khiva. The following day, we headed to the Uzbek-Turkmenistan border and spent an hour or so dealing with the visa and entry formalities. It all went smoothly, considering this is supposed to be one of the top 5 most difficult visas to obtain. Credit goes to Arslan for masterfully guiding us through the process. We then headed into Turkmenistan to see the UNESCO World Heritage Sites at the Konya-Urgench necropolis, before heading back to our hotel in the city of Dashkus. The following day, we had a short tour of the sites of Dashkus, then boarded 4x4 vehicles to negotiate a very bumpy ride into the desert to stay at a yurt camp next to the Darvaza Gas Crater, better known as the Door to Hell. Dinner was provided at the camp, and the evening was spent around the surreal site of the crater. The next day, we continued on in the 4x4s to Ashgabat, and then stayed at a luxurious hotel, then had the remainder of the day free. Arslan set up an optional dinner at a nearby restaurant that offered lovely views of the city as the sun went down. Next was the last full day of the trip. So we started in the morning with a tour of the nearby ancient city of Nisa. After that, we had a full tour of Ashgabat with a number of stops along the way at curious sites and the National Museum of History. To end the tour, our guide Arslan accompanied us on the bus to the Ashgabat airport to catch our morning flight, ending the tour with G Adventures. Okay, so my verdict. Both me and my son really enjoyed the trip. Our fellow travelers were a varied, well-traveled, energetic, and fun bunch. But anyone who signs up for a trip to the stands probably isn't a novice traveler. Both of our CEOs were great, well-organized, and really went out of their way to make the trip special. So Marifat and Arslan, a big thank you. The accommodations, transportation, and included meals were all wonderful as well, and I have nothing but praise. Now, if I had been just going to Uzbekistan, I would have totally done it on my own without a tour. For an experienced traveler, Uzbekistan is easy enough to navigate and has a low hassle factor. There's enough public transport and tourist infrastructure, so you really don't need to pay for a group tour to navigate it. My son and I arrived in Tashkent the day before the tour started, and we had no problems going all over the city on our own. But I will say that as members of a group tour, we were definitely able to hit a few spots that we would have not been able to easily get to as independent travelers. And of course, Turkmenistan, because of government restrictions, would have been impossible to visit without being in a group. So one of the things I really liked about how the accommodations and itinerary was arranged is that whenever possible, we stayed in locally owned accommodations, ate at local restaurants, and visited local craftspeople. If you have ever been to China, Thailand, or Egypt and take a tour, you'll know that you will inevitably get steered into dubious government-owned gift shops, jade, silk, papyrus, or perfume factories, and loads of other high-pressure, scammy establishments. That simply did not happen with this trip. Yes, we went into a rug workshop, saw local women do bread baking, and visited a woodcraft shop. But these were all places run by the community or operated by people who were personal acquaintances of our guides. There was never any pressure to buy anything. So even though I really enjoy being an independent traveler and making all my own arrangements, I definitely can see and understand the appeals of doing a tour like this one. Since G Adventures takes care of all the logistics, transportation, accommodation, and often meals, it gives you a lot more mental space to focus on enjoying the trip without the stress of planning every single detail. So especially if you're new to travel, going solo, or just want to build your travel confidence, a group trip like this is a great option. I really have nothing but positive things to say about the whole experience with G Adventures. From booking to pre-trip information to the leadership, logistics, and execution of the trip itself. And even though I love independent globetrotting, I could easily see myself signing up for another trip with G in the not too distant future. Thanks for tuning in. A subscribe is sincerely appreciated and helps me to continue the channel.